Welcome back to another episode from Tech Life Stories. On the podcast today, I'm with Gemma Lavin. Gemma spent most of her career in the education sector and is currently Director of Strategy and Innovation for Haberdashers Academies Trust South. She's a Prince2 Practitioner who leads digital transformations, change management, systems integrations, implementations and automations. Has a global MBA in business, also a Chartered Management Institute associate member, and a modern governor in GDPR Essentials. I think I've covered the best there for you, Gemma, from your LinkedIn profile. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Yeah, this is really, thank you for inviting me to have the conversation with you. So, yeah, good.
Good. I think let's go straight into it in regards to um, let's talk about your current role a little bit and the role of a director of strategy innovation in a multi academy trust, right? So it'd be quite interesting to know what's involved day to day.
Oh, well, so day to day never looks the same. I mean, my role does involve a lot of meetings, sort of stakeholder meetings, workshops. Um, but yeah, no one day looks the same. I joined Haberdashers Academies Trust South. HAP, we say for short. And
Okay.
I've also worked in other haberdashers schools, which is why I tend to get that bit wrong. But I joined as a director of digital experience. So my role on joining a couple of just under 2 years ago was to develop a digital strategy. So my early days looked like sort of understanding the organisation and developing a strategy that suited the context of our schools and our organisation, but that also thought about the future of how technology is evolving for our young people that are going into that world of work, but also our staff and making sure that our operations were efficient, but we can be innovative. So it's quite a big strategy to have for an organisation of 9 schools. And since then, my we're still doing that. That piece is a really important piece of my work and my role, my day to day. But my role has evolved into other areas. So I look after IT, communications, growth of the trust, so strategic growth, um, data and insights. So it's kind of evolved, and so which is why no day looks the same. So it depends on which department I'm being, most involved with.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. So going back to the strategy side of things, so you've got a strategy in place.
Yeah.
Does that have like I suppose like a deadline you're aiming to, or does that deadline change all the time and get added onto because, like you say, technology is always evolving?
Yeah, so it needs to be really flexible and agile. So the digital strategy itself is designed to be, quite open to interpretation, and so that we can kind of adapt and amend it as we go along. The plans that we develop for each school for the digital strategy within each school will have a year. So we'll set some objectives and what we're looking at. What does the digital strategy mean in terms of actions for
Hmm.
this year? So we'll have a year, and some of those may span a longer period, but every year we revisit, like, what's our focus going to be on and how are we. So year one was very much about building the foundations of the digital strategy, like who are the people going to be leading on this in each of our schools, what does that role look like, and what will it encompass, and how do we initiate the strategy. So next year we'll be building on that with a much greater focus sort of on accessibility tools, for example.
Good, really interesting. And in regards to obviously, you put together the strategy. Like, how many kind of direct reports do you have that kind of help, with ensuring that the strategy is kind of rolled out and adhered to?
So I have no direct reports on digital strategy. I have
Okay.
direct reports in other departments. So it's really about my role is very much about influencing. So I have a digital lead, we call them. So there'll be a senior member of staff in each of the schools. So they're often vice principals or assistant principals in each of the schools that have been designated the role to lead on digital strategy.
Hmm.
And so they they don't directly report to me, but they do report to me for this project for the digital side. So
Sure.
we'll but it's very much about influencing and getting them to be able to lead on this within their setting. Yeah, so it's quite a unique role in terms of leadership for the schools, but
Yeah,
that's what makes it really interesting.
it sounds very interesting. What about the other areas? Because you mentioned obviously you cover IT, comms, data. Do you have
Yeah.
direct reports across those areas then?
Yeah, so the director of IT reports to me.
Hmm.
And so our first year for IT was very much about setting the foundation for the digital strategy, but in terms of the infrastructure, the staffing, so we restructured the IT to make so the IT had been managed individually by each school, and now it's centralized. So we have a central IT team, and so we've structured things to that best suit our needs for in terms of our digital strategy. The director of communications and engagement also reports to me, and she has a very similar role to me, but very focused on communications. And she has an influential role, so she doesn't have direct reports, but she has a leader in each of the schools that kind of takes responsibility for the communications. And so she's responsible for setting the strategy and our tone of voice and all of those things. Data and insights is new, which probably sat with me more comfortably than some of the other departments from the off, because that was my background's more in the data and insights side of things.
Hmm.
And so that's new. I've just recently taken that department on. It's led by a very, very competent head of data and insights, and he has a direct report, but then again has this devolved sort of responsibility in each of the schools. So there'll be data managers in the schools that he doesn't directly line manage. So yeah, it's a sort of a matrix of management, and so yeah. And then I'm just trying to think of the other areas. I've now looking after operations and our director of operations. So yeah, and again, it's all about no direct line. Well, there is some in terms of governance,
Yeah.
but mostly managed by the schools and how we support them to take away some of the heavy lifting, but also influence them to take on some of the processes and systems that we've set up to make it more efficient at the school level.
Yeah, no, it's really good. And then, like, how many employees are there across the 9 schools that we're talking about?
So I think it's nearing 7,000, between 6 and 7,000. There's
Wow,
somewhere in the
that's
middle there. Yeah,
that's a
yeah.
lot. And then,
I hope that's right. No, sorry. I think that's students. I'm so sorry. I think hundreds I should know this, for our organisation. I think it's more like 600 or 700 employees. I'm gonna
but
have a look now.
that's okay. But students-wise, you're talking with 6 to 7,000.
Yes,
Yeah,
sorry, yes, students. So yeah,
that's
I always think of students as in our users. So
yeah.
that's the number that's more in my mind.
But like for example, those users still have access to laptops or PCs, etc. So for me, they're still a user. So
Yes, yeah, yeah.
so if there was a technical issue, they would be calling up your.
Oh,
I
of
take it you got
course.
like a typical service desk. Have you
Yeah,
got? Yeah.
we have a dedicated service desk for the students as well. So yeah, that they are counted as our users. They're our key user actually.
There you go. Then see. So and that service desk, is that actually run by the school? Is that like outsourced to another provider?
No, it's run by us in the central team. So
Hmm.
when we centralise the services, we've got a centralised help desk management. But
Good.
yeah,
Good, good. So how, because you mentioned obviously the director of IT and the director of comms across the whole of tech, how many staff would you say there are then?
oh,
I'm just trying to work
so
out
I think in
like for the
IT there's about 25 in the team.
25 in,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, in just IT. I think that includes our apprentices and things. And then we have director of communication, insight. So about 4 or 5 on top of that. Yeah. So
okay. It's quite a linear, agile team based on the amount of users because 6 or 7,000 users.
yeah,
You'd like to think that maybe you might have some more, but it
yeah.
sounds like it's manageable from what you're saying.
Yeah, because I think if you've centralized your services well, and you have, I mean, our schools aren't one-to-one device schools, so not every student is using a device in every lesson,
Okay.
although every student will have access to technology and a device. We're not a one-to-one device organisation yet, so we're sort of in the early stages of that. um, but yeah, I think it's about having the right ecosystem, and so for our students, for example, the the access that they have and the setup should be pretty much the same for every student.
Hmm.
Um, within some sort of departments, they might have access to slightly different software, but mostly it's the same. And then students, that's where staff, the variation of what they have access to, the permissions and the technology becomes much more complex. So whilst there are a lot more students, they're much easier to manage.
Sure.
And technically, they're also quite adept at being able to problem solve and use the technology that they've got. So actually, but it's the staff technology and management of that's probably the most sort of profound, that takes the most resource.
Sure. Okay. All right. It makes sense. Let's rewind a little bit because obviously we spoke about your current role, but just so the listeners get a better understanding of you, let's go back to where it all started and how you got into technology. Because obviously off air we had a bit of a conversation. Uh, you actually started in recruitment as a first job
Recruitment
kind of career.
consultant.
Yeah, I was a recruitment
Yeah.
consultant for a little while before you started your career in technology. So talk me through how it all kind of happened and panned out.
Yeah, so I've had quite a varied a varied career in different industries. I've worked in sort of hospitality as well, and business management, worked in property and in recruitment. And I think it was just opportunities that came up at the time. And they were, I was very young, and they were sort of offering quite a good package, and they were, and there was a lot to learn. And I really liked the idea of learning. Look, especially when I went into recruitment, I really liked how diverse that role looked. When I started, I met somebody in another role who said you'd be great for this.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then ended up getting into it. And actually, it's probably, I have lifelong friends from my career in recruitment. We still have Christmas dues. It's embarrassing because I think oh gosh, it's over 20 years ago. It's a very long time ago
Yeah.
since I was in that team, but we still have a bit of a team
Nice.
spirit.
That's really nice though.
Um, but it was great, and I think actually that was probably my first, although it was recruitment, my introduction to technology. Quite how much we relied heavily on our systems and our
Hmm.
information that we had. But also, I was recruiting for project management roles, and they were mostly in technology and payroll and things like that. So, implementation of a new payroll system. So, it kind of opened up. I had to learn a bit about that industry and understand, what is this role of a project manager? What do they do?
Yeah.
Um, and they were getting decent salaries at the time, so I was very intrigued to understand a bit more about what that was all about. But yeah, so it was very much about, having the right information, connecting the right people. The communications piece has always been important to everything I've done. And then I ended up transitioning into education, mostly sort of initially because it was a better work-life balance for my family. I had two young children, and I was quite young, and I just realized that I was struggling to be there. So in recruitment and the other jobs that I'd done, they were quite demanding on time. So
I can vouch
yeah, I
for that.
looked for
I never could.
and it never really ended, like, I don't know if that was partly my fault, but I would often take calls and do things in the evenings and
Yes.
weekends. So yeah, I was just looking for a bit more balance, and so a term time only job, just why, a bit of a pause, why I kind of, recalibrated. But it actually turned out much more than that, and I sort of went through many different roles in education, and to a point where I didn't need the term time anymore, so I could take on a much more demanding role of like a data manager.
Hmm.
Um, and that's where I mean, I've always had a love for improve. So any role that I've done has been about how can we improve the process and streamline it. And technology has always been my enabler. So often got frustrated from the early days where we used to manually log things. And in a school, it was, like even consent forms and things like that, everything was done manually. So, and
Yes.
I was just like, this is not the best use of my time or anyone's time really. We were on decent salaries, and just logging yes and no's was just, I just thought that's crazy. And there were so many other really important things that couldn't get done while we were doing that. But so yeah, so I was always looking for ways to automate and streamline the mundane.
It's good.
Um,
Anything that's not having to be done repetitively
mm,
is the reason for processing it, right, and streamlining it.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. So it's quite simple, really, from the beginning, sort of like, just using forms and things. But actually, that those simple things back then seemed like, wow,
yeah.
this is great.
So let me get my head right in this. So you was in recruitment. Obviously, you had an understanding of what project managers and a bit of technology done. But when you kind of left, then it seemed like you didn't actually go into a job specifically for technology. It was more term time. So once you was in the education sector, eventually you ended up, in a data manager type role, and that's where really technology kind of blossomed for you. Would you say?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
So, I'd done other like different roles, but actually started. My focus was always on data, and I got quite, I went down a rabbit hole of like trying to complex formulas in Excel were really like, I thought, oh my God, I really enjoy this. I had no idea.
yeah.
And actually, if somebody was asking me about career choices, back at school, I would never have said data or formula were going to be my, passion. I would have said absolutely not. But yeah, that's where I really sort of enjoyed, and I was given space in education. I worked with some really fantastic people that give me some time and taught me new skills with Excel, and then moved into SQL and basic coding skills that blew my mind, because then I could really understand what we could do with this data and how we could really make a difference to
So
our operation.
so you were getting involved with SQL, basic coding, then, yeah.
Yeah,
So this is
yeah,
someone
yeah.
who's not had any
No,
technical type
no.
background in the past. I think it's great to hear that though, because I think as well. I don't know if do you tell this story to your students, like.
No, I don't. Do you know what? It's really funny. And even today, I was thinking I'm always a bit embarrassed because I think people have like, had with their computer science degrees, and they've gone in really with their eyes open, knowing that this is a passion for them, and they've worked really hard. And I've been fortunate to work with some of those people that have spent a lot of time getting me to where I am.
Yeah.
But I have to say, it's not something I generally talk about. It's because for other reasons, which we'll probably touch on, being a female in technology and sort of overseeing quite technical teams,
Mhm.
you're often challenged on your credibility. And so like my story was never going to be, oh, I just picked this up from, a love of formulas when I joined it, as a data manager, and it kind of evolved. Um, so yeah, yeah, I don't feel that, but I think it is something, you're right,
I
when I
think,
thought about having this
yeah,
conversation.
I think it's a really inspiring story, and actually, a lot of the guests we've had on the podcast in the past actually have a similar type background where they've kind of just fallen into technology, and maybe some of those, the majority of those are females, but that's what makes it more of an inspirational story, because I think sometimes females see technology as maybe like a boring type sector, or it's coding and it doesn't have the right appeal. But there's so much more to technology. There's the communication side of things, the strategy side, the process, like you mentioned before.
Mm.
And I think it's your story. You should definitely shout about it, because it will inspire other young ladies who are unsure of their career path to actually maybe think, actually, maybe I should look at technology. Maybe it's not as boring or not as appealing as what everyone says. So yes, share your story more, without a doubt.
No, thank you.
No, not a problem at all. So you're in that data manager role. What's next? Are you now thinking, oh, I like this. This is my career path
Yeah,
going forward?
I did. I think for a moment I got caught up in, I need to be a data analyst. I need to know everything. So I often, once I get into something, I kind of then need to feel that I need to know it inside out.
Sure.
And I became a little bit overwhelmed because there's so many different types of coding language, and I just thought, oh my gosh, I don't know, like, how am I going to catch up with people that are doing all of this great stuff? And then a project came in to our office, which was to develop our own bespoke parent portal. We had developers that, like I said, that I worked alongside with as a data manager. Um, and then I was slowly given sort of line management responsibility for the team, and then asked to take over this project of developing the parent portal. So, and then I've sort of realized that it's not for me, data isn't going to be, I'm not going to be a data analyst, but I know enough about, have a breadth of knowledge to know what's capable, like, what we can do with it. um, but I think the project, the bespoke development of a system, and there were a few other smaller systems leading up to that, but that kind of opened my eyes to that there's a lot more to
Hmm.
this role in technology. And so really focused in on like user experience. And so I kind of then got really interested in that and how to make things really intuitive for our parents. So we were working for like a leading independent school, and we really needed, we had quite a demanding uh, you know customer to please, and our parents needed to be able to get information about their children quickly and easily. And so it was a really fun a project to be a part of, and it opened my eyes to a whole nother world of technology. um, but yeah, and then slowly I became the head of information services, so all of our information systems and kind of streamlining a lot of what we've done, because actually over time, where we'd had a lot of resource, we'd had developers and things had kind of spiraled through our bespoke development. So we'd gone a bit crazy with all of our systems and processes that were designed to make people's jobs easier. But then there was becoming a bit of a bottleneck. We weren't a development house. We didn't have, this was all managed in house. So that when we started to see the limitations of doing that.
Sure.
um, and so I kind of highlighted that I think we're going a bit too far. So there's somewhere in the middle we need to be here, and it's not to have everything developed in house. And just being able to communicate that, I think, up and manage up some of the expectations, I think got me into a much more strategic role where I was leading the team. So, um, yeah, I'm
I've,
not sure if I've answered your
yeah,
question.
I'm just
I've gone off
fascinated by the
piece a
story
bit.
because so that data manager role, how long was you doing that role before that kind of head of information role became of like available and you fell into, not fell into, but you got?
Um, yeah, yeah, it was a couple of years. So, but it was evolving from quite quickly. So, I came in as a data manager, and we were very much focused on our pupil progress data and things like that. But then, because of other staff changes and other issues that were happening, I was asked to temporarily sort of line manage somebody and then
Okay.
another person. And so it wasn't 2 years before the role had started to become a little bit bigger than a data manager, but it was about 2 years later that it was like head of information services, which then the reason for that new title was because we were joining two independent schools together, and we needed to bring together two technical teams and all of our information systems. So then it became a big project to manage. But yeah, it's hard to explain in a really
No, no,
quick
no.
conversation how it all evolved.
I completely get it. I'm just thinking when
Yeah.
you merged these two schools, was there not someone from the other school that could have had this head of information management role, or was it a case of that you were
Yeah.
definitely the right person for the job, or was there someone else that was vying for the
Well,
for the
yeah.
job at all?
Yeah, there was a whole team that looked exactly the same as us in the other school. um so it wasn't, yeah, it was never. I think that the thing that kind of put me ahead of the other team is that I was, before their decision to centralize the systems, I was already saying that, having some of these conversations, and a part of the conversations, we were two independent schools that had the same name, that operated completely independently and didn't
Mhm.
share anything. And so it was to start sort of, the conversations were like, we should be sharing some of what we're doing across the wall. And so leading some of that, so the parent portal, for example, they could use this. It's crazy that they're not using this
Yeah.
because we've put a lot in, and actually then we could double our technical support for it because there's a limitation there. And I think being part of those conversations from the outset to say that even the systems that we had, that we weren't using them to their full potential. So then sharing that knowledge over the wall. So I think it kind of set me up, probably annoyingly to the other team, to be the person that was always coming over saying we should be doing more together, we should be doing this. So it put me in a good position to be somebody that wanted to do that.
Mhm.
Whereas I think there was a bit of a, a bit of a change for people in terms of bringing the teams together, and not everybody was on board with that. So having somebody that believed in it and could see the value in it helped.
Yeah, no, definitely. So was that your first time of actually managing individuals, would you say?
No, so in my previous life, I'd worked in, so sort of one of my first management roles was working in a hotel and restaurant. So I was an assistant manager. It was one of my first jobs of
Okay.
sort of, so I had to plan rotas and things like that. So I had, and the education I'd had up until then had been all in like business management and leadership, with
Mhm.
no particular sort of specialism, but just generally business management. So um, yeah, so I think that definitely helped. Although it's not something I'd thought about until you've asked. That
Yeah,
probably gave me a good
I was going to say,
understanding.
like, how did you find that transition? But obviously, I know you've managed hotel. I mean, if you think about it, managing hotel staff and then managing a tech team,
Very
they are
different.
different. Yeah, very very different.
Very
I know management's management, but they are different. So, how did you transition into managing individuals from a technical background? It'd be interesting for the listeners to hear that.
I think because I was a part of the team initially, and I think it was really, I think it's about investing in people and understanding them and their different perspectives. So technical teams, in, like as you've said, are very different, and um, what I could often see that I was quite different. I was a different member in that team. I wasn't the natural fit for a technical team. I could see where. Um, I could see it from the technical perspective. They were asked to do things and they would just do them, but there was nobody communicating back.
Mhm.
And so or sort of being that bridge that could understand the business function and the technical side.
Sure.
So I think being able to do that, and then also not just to focus on what it meant for the business but the technical team, like from their kind of understanding some of their challenges and what they were, how they felt, and giving them a bit of a voice as well, and saying, well, actually, we could steer this. You're the technical expert in this area. You should have a voice on this. Like,
Yeah.
what would you say? And kind of helping them to articulate and communicate that. So I think that helped within my original team in the first school, and then joining the second team, it was just about sort of spending time with people and getting to know them, and understanding, and actually acknowledging that they are the expert in their area, and that I trust them to do the right thing. And all I want to do is understand how can we get the how can we get the most out of this so that there's value for you and the organization. So I think it's really about connecting with people.
I think you're 100% right. And I've worked in organisations before where we've had technology leaders who are very, very good at communicating with the user and then taking that back to the technical team. But I've also worked with ones which used language which the user didn't really understand. And you can kind of tell us users were lost in their communication. So I can see why you've done very, very well with that, because I think your communication skills are second to none, if I'm honest with you. And you've probably picked up all the way go back to your hotel roles, your recruitment roles. Yeah, you have to be a great communicator in all those. So I think you've done really, really well in that aspect. So my hat's off to you for that. Um, in regards to what happened thereafter, so these two schools come together. So are we still now? Are we part of Haberdashers now?
Yes,
Yeah.
these are the independent sector of haberdashers. So there's two schools that we're joining.
Okay. All right. So
Nothing to do with where I am now.
I was going
They're
to
very
say,
separate.
okay. So eventually, was the next role after the two haberdasher schools? Was that the current role at the moment?
Yeah, so I spent like 10 years in that role, and we went through quite significant projects. We implemented a HR system.
Hmm.
We merged all of our back end functions, and then through that project at the two schools, I had to lead the project that involved the infrastructure and IT infrastructure team as well. So not directly line managing them, but kind of project managing their role in bringing together all of the systems. So I was exposed to quite a lot in terms of, the interdependencies of the network, and getting that right. Um, that was probably my most challenging part of my role, because firstly I had to learn quite a lot to understand, you know, what was and wasn't possible. Um, and I also was the only female in that team, so often was challenged around that, or really felt like I was the only that I was a female in the room.
Yeah, sure.
Um, but yeah, and then so after there's quite a few years of getting all of that piece of work finished, because what will it look like? So once that piece is done, what will your role look like? And I thought, oh my gosh, I wouldn't be able to just fall back to just line managing the team and the normal day to day. It was definitely I definitely wanted to move more into project management. But as I started to develop my MBA and things like that, I really was more interested in sort of the strategic and change management piece more generally, from
Sure.
a strategic role, rather than managing closely the technical team. So yeah, and this role came up, and it was director of digital experience, and it covered a huge amount, and communications and IT in there. And I thought communications really is about, the organizational culture, um, and that change piece. If you're working with IT, the power of looking after those two departments and actually being able to inform change, I just thought it was a fantastic opportunity. I think that managing the change, and only from the IT and technical perspective from my previous role, saw challenges in that if you had more of a role in the communication side of the organization, that you could have really brought people along with you,
Sure.
in a much easier way. So doing it from a technical standpoint is quite difficult. So yeah, I just thought great opportunity, um, and it was so broad that I thought, well, we'll just see what what this next challenge will bring.
And how long you been in the current role now?
Just under 2 years.
2 years. Okay. So
Yeah.
would you say these past 2 years have been the biggest challenge from a career perspective for you?
No, I have to say that I've enjoyed it more than anything else. But I'd say the challenge was definitely in the early days of my first big projects, and
Okay.
understanding, all of the lessons learned, like when
Yeah.
things don't go well, or executive buy-in isn't fully there, or you haven't got the sponsorship and the organizational change that's happening at the same time. I think that was my most challenging, biggest learning experience. Coming into this role, I think that I've come with a lot more sort of a understanding.
Hmm.
So it's really, I mean, it's challenging in a very different way. Um, but it's, yeah, I'm not sure how I would. I mean, it's still a huge learning curve, because I'm getting,
That was my next
I'm
question. Is it
looking
still a
after
learning
some of the
curve for you?
areas. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I think I don't I yeah, I think if you're not learning, then I mean, I don't think I would enjoy a role that I wasn't sort of pushing myself in. So, the growth side of the trust is really about looking at how I mean, there's always that technical element for me, and how the systems and processes can really support what we're doing. So that's great. How to seamlessly onboard another school into our environment, and making sure that our infrastructure is scalable and all of that, is a key part of what I do.
Sure.
But actually, there's a much bigger piece in terms of understanding where we are, what our value is as an organization, and how we can support other education, other schools, and why they should join us, is completely new. Um, but yeah, so it's a huge learning curve, and working closely with, again, I think everyone that I've worked with, I've been very fortunate to work with people that have been able to sort of stretch and develop me. And the CEO that I currently work with has been able to sort of focus in on areas of strength, and tell me where I need to, where I do need to develop. Um, and I have a coach and a mentor as well, so that's been really helpful in navigating the new territories.
Oh, it's one of my questions I was going to ask. If you were, struggling on anything, have you got someone that you can turn to? Or have you got a group of people or anything like that? I mean, you mentioned a coach. So is there any other kind of key figures that you would turn to?
Yeah, so I think in this role, I think networking has been very important to
Hmm.
understand how other organizations are working and navigating these challenges, be that AI, and how that will impact education, or, maths, how they're growing, and all of the political landscape around that. So I started out by just attending events and getting to know people, but I've met some really amazing people through different networks. One of them's Matt PN. Um, oh, sorry, I think I lost you there for a
That's
quick
fine. I'm
second.
still here. Don't worry. Are you okay?
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine. Don't worry. We can edit this bit out. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah,
Gemma, can you hear me
so yeah,
okay?
no, networking has been, I can now, you're kind of coming in and out a little bit.
Okay. Probably Wi-Fi issue, so apologies
You're
for that.
right. Oh no, you're back, fine.
Good. Okay. Let's carry on.
But yeah, so networking, I've become a part of through networking. I've met lots of different people, and so like leaders in this space, thought
Hmm.
leaders, and we're currently I joined in on a project which is about unpacking AI in education and understanding what the impact's going to be longer term, and that's being led by sort of Google and Dr. Fiona Aubrey Smith, who so I'm always completely in awe of the people that I get to spend time with. We also work closely with leaders in Microsoft to understand, how we can support each other. So yeah, I think it's definitely m- to understand fully the breadth of my role and to have people to speak to is it's been through mainly through networking. My coach obviously gives me that personalized feedback, and I can kind of bounce ideas off and kind of talk through areas of challenge, or where I'm feeling pulled in sort of many directions, and I can kind of sort of think that through with him. um but yeah, I'd say networking is really important.
I think this is an area where some technical professionals fall down quite a lot because the really good IT professionals I know use their network to secure other jobs, whether that's on a permanent basis or on a contract basis. And I spoke to a candidate of mine yesterday who has never ever had to use a recruiter in his 20 years of experience. He's got every single
Mm.
job through one of his network connections, basically. So he's got a great network. And he said he's built that network up, obviously, over time, over the years, through working in different organizations, going to various different networking events, being um, active on LinkedIn, so people are aware of him. He said, the only time in my life where I've had 1 year off work, I reached out to recruiters and I didn't get the response I want. And again, it got back into work by utilizing his network. So I think people underestimate how important it is to network. I mean, for those, I mean, obviously, it sounds like you network well. If you were suggesting for someone who doesn't network currently, how would they start networking? What are the type of things they should be doing? What are the type of events they should be looking at?
So I think that it depends on the industry that you're working in. I think nearly every industry that you work in has some networks that might be attached. So for me, and I think it's useful as well to join networks that are broader than that and outside of that. So for me, joining the network with Microsoft, and I joined a the Charity IT Leaders network, which has been fantastic. And it isn't focused on education; it's much broader than that. So that's been really good. But I think if you're talking about in terms of starting out, LinkedIn is your sort of powerhouse for connecting with people that are like-minded in your industry,
Hmm.
just understanding the different roles as well that are technical roles. So following different people and thought leaders. And then you'll often get exposed to what, networks, and some of them are online on LinkedIn, and you can join and hear people having really powerful conversations that might, that will influence you. But yeah, I think I think that was probably my starting point. Yeah. So I joined LinkedIn following different people, and you'll find people will follow you if they've got a similar role and want to know a little bit more about what you're doing over there. Um, yeah, LinkedIn is fantastic, but also just as a learning resource as well. I use it for sort of short courses and things like that. I think it's been really helpful for me in my career. Um, Outside of the sort of qualifications that you talked about, I do lots of short courses on LinkedIn.
I
Um,
think I saw one Six Sigma course you did.
yeah, yeah, and there's
Yeah,
others that I do and I don't publish, or I might dip in and out of, and it's not necessarily, I'm not aiming to get a sort of a badge about it, but actually I can find a little bit about that thing, and sort of open my mind a little bit more to that space. So Six Sigma was a fantastic course to do. Actually, I recommend that one highly. But yeah, I think,
how long does a course like that take, by the way? The
oh
Six Sigma
gosh,
one, for
I
example.
can't. I think it took me a few weeks because I didn't have the time to really just focus on it. So I dipped in and out of it and watched the really short videos that
Yeah,
takes you through, and then you just do, and it's not that difficult. And if you get, it's more about just understanding the what Six Sigma is. But I think once you
sure,
get up to the black belt and things like that, and you start to get more involved, then it is, you're talking a lot more commitment in terms of time.
sure.
It really depends on what you're trying to achieve from it. But I think even with that, you'll find networks and people through those courses. So it might be that I,
Mhm.
follow somebody that's doing Six Sigma, or the person that was leading that course, and I will find out about engagement events that they're doing. Um, I get it's not for everyone. I really did not enjoy networking. I found it I still do. I think when I first walk into an event or a networking event, it takes me a while to warm up and start talking to people. It's not um, always my comfort zone, but
Mhm.
especially when they're people that you don't know and you feel that they're incredibly knowledgeable in this area, you're like, I don't really have anything to add to this conversation. But yeah, people are very nice, and they're more than happy to talk to you. And I've become, yeah, I really enjoy them. Um, and I think, now I'm going to these events and I've been asked to be on a panel or speak, and I think that for me is a new level of discomfort, but I'm preparing for. But I think it's really important to be part of the conversation, and I think most people that find it uncomfortable will soon find out that most people feel like that, and actually
Yeah, I
it's,
agree.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, I think that's been really helpful for me. And I go through curves of networking where I get really familiar with the group that I'm networking with, and then really comfortable, and they're a source of, like you say, somebody to turn to and ask questions, um, to other networks that I'm joining, and I'm really not in my comfort zone, and I'm learning about them and this new area. Um,
Yeah,
but I think they're really important to push yourself to.
yeah, I agree. I agree. And just going back to you, because you mentioned you've got a coach.
Yes.
So this is just a one-on-one coach? Is this something you kind of have privately? Was this part of in part of the school, or
Well, yeah, the
how does this work?
school offer. Actually, I was looking for a coach. I've had a coach previously, which was a lady. It was great. She was focused on working with people in work that lead technical teams. So you asked earlier, actually, that transition. I had a coach to help me with some of that, because it is very different managing a technical team with very different areas of discipline, and trying to make them, how do we work together cohesively as a team, and we're all coming from our own sort of areas. So that was really helpful. But the when I was looking for a coach, Haberdashers they offer most people, and anyone that's leading as well, the opportunity to have a coach. So
Hmm.
yeah, and you have, like, they have a portfolio of coaches that can help you. So um, I tried out a couple. First, I had a couple of intro conversations with people that were lovely, but just didn't feel that we immediately connected, and was
Sure.
and now I've met somebody that I just find very comfortable. We It's not always, yeah, each meeting is very different, and sometimes it isn't it's not very linear. It's not about trying to get to an end goal, but it might be sort of navigating some of the challenges, or having a different perspective on something. It's really helpful.
Yeah, sounds like it. And how often do you meet the coach?
So this one I meet once every 2 to 3 weeks, more 3 to 4 actually now. But my previous coach, I met like once a week. It depends on your sort of availability. You don't want you're meeting your coach to become another chore or something you're squeezing in.
Yeah,
So you've got to make it work with your schedule. And I think that I think every 3 to 4 weeks works really well for me, because by that time there's quite a lot's happened, and we've got quite a
hmm,
lot to unpack, and then we'll talk about, and it kind of sets me up for the next term of work. So
sure.
um, yeah,
Okay. And the coach, is it just from a technical point of view, or are you getting yeah, you're nodding your
yeah,
head straight away. Yeah, okay. So it's non-tech as well. So
non-technical.
just so you know, tech individuals might be thinking, why would I need someone to, coach me from a non-technical perspective? So tell me the like type of things that they can help with there.
So it's like learning to like people management,
Hmm.
and sort of understanding things from a different perspective. So I think if for a technical person, it's more important than any person to have a coach with that breadth of skills that can understand the organizational challenges and the other perspectives of things, to really challenge your rationale for, maybe going down a certain route or choosing a certain way of approaching something. And yeah, I mean, I think there's so many things I could say that are really helpful about a coach. I think just having somebody to sometimes just to talk it through, just to say things out loud,
Yeah.
really helpful. Um, Often you'll find you come up with the solutions and the answers yourself, and you know them, but actually having that space and that headspace to sit and speak to somebody and sort of articulate them, it makes a world of difference. Also, I think my coach picks up on things that that I don't always see in myself, so able to kind of help me see my value, or things where I might underestimate myself or overthink in certain areas, and they can kind of shine
Hmm.
a little bit of a light on that. So it really helps with your emotional intelligence and self-awareness, I think, having somebody to
Yeah.
kind of bring those to the surface for you.
Yeah, definitely. Great. I agree with you. I mean, I've used a coach from a business perspective, and I think you're right. I think some of the times it's great just to have a voice that you can voice out and explain to people some of the challenges you're having. But generally, I find that I know the answers, but it just needs coaxing out of me to get the answers. So I think it's a great kind of platform to do that. So I, I'm a big advocate of coaches. So I'm glad you've got one. And I'm glad it helps you on a day-to-day basis. I wanted to rewind a little bit because you mentioned, and I noticed this on your LinkedIn about Dr. Fiona Aubrey Smith. Is that right? If I
Yeah,
pronounce that correctly. Um, and I think I saw one of the topics was around how to leverage AI in education.
yeah,
Let's talk a little bit about AI and the impact that's had on the education sector, because I think some people will say that AI for students is not great because they can effectively get all the answers they want from AI. Um, but I think there's also a place for it in the education sector. So it'd be interesting to hear what your thoughts are and the education sector's thoughts are on AI.
yeah. So I think it's a space where even people like Fiona and some of the really esteemed sort of professors that are talking on this subject are just unpacking. Like we're asking that question that you've got, like, what is the real impact? What does this mean? How can it be used to enhance what we're doing and enhance the education? And what are all of the other implications and provocations about AI? So we're really in the early stages. We definitely don't have all of the answers, but we're
Hmm.
we're trying to by getting together a group of people that are kind of leading in this space, and surfacing all of the challenges. We're trying to inform some of the governance around this and the frameworks so that education can be supported in how we deal with this change. Um, For me and personally, like where I am now, I definitely don't have all of the answers, but I think that AI or even AGI now that I'm hearing about is going to fundamentally change the world that we live in. It's going to keep changing and it's going to evolve at a rapid pace. And there's nothing we're going to be able to do to kind of be at the front of that and always be able to predict and navigate. So it's really how do we position ourselves to be adaptable? How do we, in terms of for education, how are we preparing our students for that, and the way that teaching and learning may evolve? What are the key focus areas on education for students? So, you know, the question of knowledge, like what is knowledge, like what do you need to know, and what can just be information that you can find out by, Google's been there for a long time, but AI's kind of
Yeah.
taken us to another level with that. So it's really, I don't think anything's going to change massively overnight, but we're starting to sort of prepare ourselves for, okay, how do we evolve, like what are the focus areas, like what do we need to do to help a child or young person succeed in the future that we can't even get our head around. um, and so I think we all agree that it's the human skills, our
Hmm.
critical thinking, our empathy, our ability to connect, all of those things are really the key. So technology will continue to change, but it's the human element that will shape and steer that, and it's how we use them and how we drive those machines and then the technology that's going to make the difference. So
Sure.
what do we need to focus on? I mean, I'm sorry, it's such a big topic and area.
It is. It's massive. Let's be honest with you. It's really big, and it's still people still learning it and navigating around it. And I know the recruitment sector is. Um, I mean, look. Let's be honest. I can go into ChatGPT and say type up my CV based on X, Y, Z, and I've got a brand new CV. It's
Yeah,
unbelievable.
yeah,
But I think if I was being a cheeky student, I would be asking ChatGPT to write my essays for me at the moment,
yeah,
and then adding my human element to it, and not just copy and pasting it. But
yeah,
how can we navigate around that, or can't we? Is there a
yeah.
way that we can tell a ChatGPT version essay compared to someone who's actually written it themselves?
So there are some tools that will help you with that now. None of them are 100% accurate, but there are
Hmm.
tools that can help you. So they're continuously developing. So for universities and even schools that are using, like Turnitin has an AI detector element to it now that you can subscribe to. There's ChatGPT Zero where you can run a piece of work through and see if it's been AI generated. I've tested it. I've actually written something completely on my own, and it highlighted some of it as AI generated. So it's not completely accurate, but
Okay, that's interesting.
mostly, yeah. So but I think what we will need to do is be able to challenge how we validate the information that we present and find. So, you know, ChatGPT can give you the answers, but how do you know, like, what are your sources and references, and how do you know that they're valid, and how do you distinguish fact from fiction, and
Hmm.
how can you interrogate the information that you've got to know that it's valid, and that it's true. So you will need to be there's no way around. You do need some human element to be able to challenge that, but in answer to your question, I don't think we're there yet in terms of stopping us. We're not there yet in terms of students being able to do that and not take advantage of some of these tools. um, but it's throwing up interesting questions. Some people have said, we don't use maps, that we don't get out a map anymore and to try and work out where we're driving. We rely on our sat nav or whatever it might be. Um, and you and I in a day-to-day world wouldn't rely on knowing all of the answers and information and the equations that we might need. Um, we rely on technology to give us those answers. So, what is it what's important, it's asking the question about education, like what is it important to know and learn. um And also, if we haven't got those skills, if we de-skill ourselves because we're over relying on AI and technology, what does that mean for the development of those technologies in the future? Because if we over rely on them, so it's just huge. We're at the moment, I think it's about having good guidance in our schools about what is and isn't acceptable in the use of AI. We will do our best to check that the work is valid and human, but we'll also encourage the use of AI to generate information and interrogate it, and so using it for good. How can it improve, or streamline something, and how do you get the most out of it? So it's not about saying how do we detect and ban and put a stop to it, because actually that's not realistic.
Yeah.
And we're going to be using this technology, into the future, which will evolve. So yeah, very early stage. And that's why I think, going back to your point about networking, being in the conversation with lots of perspectives on this is really important. I don't think any
Hmm.
one of us as an individual are going to be able to. I mean, I'm certainly not an expert. I'm there as a participant, but none of the experts have, could give you a straight answer. Um, but we're asking the right, I think it's about asking the right questions and starting to think about what the impact is, and then how do we
Yeah.
deal with that impact.
Okay. Look, let's be honest, yeah, AI is here to stay. It's probably the future of technology, right? So it's just about harnessing how we use it as best as possible. Um, what would you say, from a technology perspective, are some of the challenges that the education sector particularly find difficult? Is AI a challenge? Are there other challenges from a technology perspective within the education sector?
I think in education, cybersecurity is a major concern. I think education's been a real target for cybersecurity for a little while now, and I think that with AI and how technology, the sophistication of some of these attacks evolves, we become more vulnerable. So I think that's a huge area for us. Um, Introduction of AI to recruitment is a huge challenge in the education sector, and it's a major issue. So AI might be able to support us with some of that and streamlining some of the workload and taking off, some of the administrative burden to make it a more appealing sector to work in. But actually, then
Mhm.
understanding all of the ethics, the bias, and all of the implications of relying too much on AI. So they are big issues. So AI and how we can use it for good, but then also the implications of that, and cybersecurity for us, and actually being, making sure that our student data and information that we have and rely on to run our schools is safe.
It's good, really good, really like it, and I think, yeah, cybersecurity is a massive one, not just within the education sector, within all sectors. Let's be honest with you.
Mm.
So, very very sophisticated stuff going on at the moment, and scary. And you're not the only sector struggling to recruit. A lot of sectors are. So yeah, don't feel it's just the education sector at the moment, because it's not. Um, we've gone this far without really mentioning women in technology. Obviously, someone who didn't choose technology as a career, um, not that you fell into it, but I suppose you eventually chose that path. What would you say to young women kind of growing up now, that don't really have a career path, or maybe thinking, is there an actual career path for me in technology? What does that look like? And how do we entice more women, or young ladies, shall I say, into the technology sector?
I think that's understanding the option. Like, there's so many different ways that you can go with technology, and my role's become quite strategic and business orientated, but it is sort of underpinned by technology as the enabler. But there are so many roles. I think there are other roles as well that I'd happily, if my job was to disappear tomorrow, that I would happily go into. And development, I really, really enjoyed working in that space, and understanding user experience and things like that. And I met young women that came in to my team to work and start a career in coding, and they really opened my eyes up to the endless possibilities. And I think that the thing with a career in technology is that you can shape it, because a
Hmm.
lot of these roles will, they either don't exist, or they're depending on where you go. But you can shape the role as well to suit, your interests, and where you want to go, and the path that you want to take your career into. So I think when I was younger, I hadn't really been exposed to women working in technology, or technology wasn't really, it wasn't a big conversation in the way that it is now. I think
Hmm.
for young women and young people generally, I think there's a better understanding of the opportunities that there are with technology, and I think AI has helped that, because we know that there are going to be jobs that in the future that don't currently exist. So but yeah, I just think we add women add a lot to this sector, and I think I value having a team of mixed, sort of a very diverse team, gender, race. I think it brings so much to what you're doing. If you've got a very homogenous team, I just don't think
Hmm.
it's innovative as I can't say my words now, as innovative as it could be. So I just think they bring different sort of perspectives to this space, like. And I think as we are looking towards the future of AI and the ethical implications, I think having more women in this space is going to be really important. And I think our perspective is really important on this. Um, and I just, yeah, please don't see a technology role as somebody that's sitting in a dark room, sort of, coding, and doesn't, those images, they're just not real now, So the
Yeah.
people that I meet that work in technology are very, there's a real mixture, but there's lots of outgoing people that are doing all sorts in this space. So I would just look into it. Look at all of the roles that there are available. Use ChatGPT to find out what
Okay.
your options
Back to
are.
AI. I like
Yeah,
it. I
but
like it.
but yeah, there's lots to learn in this space.
Is there anything, and there might not be, but your school, particularly Haberdashers, do they drive a message at all for getting women into technology at all?
Yeah, well, I think generally as part of our digital strategy and opening up the possibilities for our young people in terms of career in technology, regardless of your gender, there isn't a particular focus. I mean, there are girls in coding, and there are smaller groups that
Yeah.
that we that we that some of our schools work in, which are great. But I think generally we're focusing on our pupils understanding, like, the possibilities and the career opportunities with technology. But I think if you're coming to work in a school, we recruit apprentices, and we've got a couple of female. We've got a female apprentice in our technical team now, and I think it's a really lovely entry to a
Yeah.
career in technology. It's quite a safe space coming to the education sector to work on. I mean, personally, I found it a really nurturing space where people are really happy to share and help you develop in a technical role. So I think it's a really great entry level role to join in a school.
Good. Yeah, I agree with you. And we are obviously seeing a uptick in more women getting into technology, but I just think that we could still do more, right? I think
Absolutely.
the what you said earlier on around, I think people just envisage not just women but men as well. Someone in a dark room coding away for hours on end. It's nothing like that. Let's be honest with you. I think the communication part of your skill sets is becoming more and more important in technology, and where businesses have realized that technology is at the forefront of what they need. It's integral that technology sits on part of the floor, whereas in the past maybe technology was in a dark corner somewhere, or not in a dark corner but in a corner somewhere and on a different floor. But yeah, it's integral, so it's a really, really important driver for, I think, to drive everyone into technology, so that they know that it's not just about a dark room and a dark place. There is so much more to it. And you've told a fantastic story today about how you wasn't driven by technology originally, but eventually had kind of fallen into it, and your passion grew for it. And I think you said something earlier on which really stood out to me, was that I think you said that when it looked like you were going to become a data analyst, that you really wanted to learn that role. But actually, sometimes it's hard to learn a role and so many different technologies and skill sets that it's it's tough. So I think sometimes when individuals see a job description, they're going, "Oh, I haven't got that skill. I won't apply for it." Actually, no, you need to. I always say to a candidate, if you tick 60 to 70% of the job role, apply for the
Bye.
job. An organization will be flexible with you. They should understand that not everyone's going to have have touched all these different technologies. So apply for the job. There's nothing wrong with applying for the job. I don't know.
No, I
Do you agree with that?
couldn't agree more. I've never applied for a job that I fully meet all of the criteria for the job. I think that I wouldn't be moving or pushing myself or progressing in any way if I only applied for jobs that I fully fulfilled the role for. Um,
Yeah,
somebody taught me that quite early on. When I started, when I became a data manager, I was like, I'm not really, that I don't have a computer science degree, and I don't, I only know how I can do these sort of formulas, but I'm not sure about. And they were like, That's not important." And sort of somebody gave me the advice that you've just given there, and sort of said that, in particular, women tend to feel that they need to know everything about a role before applying for it. Um, and she was able to really open up my mind to that's not how you get on, like that's not how you'll progress.
yeah,
So that was really helpful. And when I said about thinking that I needed to know everything about everything, I think there was a time where I become really overwhelmed and real imposter syndrome, thinking that, well, I need to know everything about the infrastructure and how a domain works, and all, what's a forest, all of these things. And I would go away and kind of get lost in information. And again, it was somebody similar to the lady that talked me through that gave me the advice and said that your skill, your you know your value isn't in knowing every single thing. It's actually having this breadth of knowledge and understanding.
yeah,
And there are times when it's really helpful to get into the detail and understand a bit more. And I think when you're leading a team where there might be challenges about them knowing best, and you being able to steer the ship a bit, I think then there's some
yeah.
value in understanding and getting into the detail. Um, but yeah, definitely you don't need to know everything about and that took me a while to sort of get, and now I'm very comfortable not knowing everything. Like, or not that I ever did, but like, I'm comfortable not thinking that I must know every single detail about everything, but to know enough
Yeah,
to ask the right questions, and
exactly.
to kind of have some reassurance that this is the right decision and the right path to be going in. But
Yeah, no, definitely, definitely. Gemma, it's been a blockbuster of an episode. I want to say thank you for coming on. You've been fantastic, and thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Any last remarks before we finish?
No, thank you so much. It's been really good. Again, this is me out of my comfort zone. So, like with roles, I just encourage people to do things like this. And if that's your first networking event, get out there and meet some people, because actually it's things like this that will really, they open up your mind in a different way, and expose you to new skills and things. So I'm very grateful that you've had me on, and I hope it's been okay.
It's been fantastic. No, you were superb,
Thank
superb
you.
guest. So thank you very much for your time, and hopefully we have you on in the future again.
Yeah, brilliant. That would be great. Thank you so
Right then,
much.
no problem. I'll speak to you soon.